Hello, my dear warriors. They told you you'd never be anything. Remember how easily those words came out of their mouths, like it was a fact written in stone, like they were reading your future off a script someone else wrote. They spoke with confidence they didn't earn, authority they didn't deserve. They looked at you and saw limits, not potential. They saw smallness, not becoming. They thought they knew your story because they saw your starting point. But they never imagined how far you'd travel without their permission. Those words weren't predictions. They were projections. Their voice wasn't prophecy. It was insecurity in disguise. They needed you to fail so they could feel safe staying exactly where they were. They needed you to stay small so their comfort wouldn't look like weakness. They needed your silence to prove their voice mattered. But you didn't give them what they wanted. You didn't fall apart. You didn't fall apart. You didn't swallow their doubt and call it truth. You took those words, those cheap, careless words, and you carried them like iron in your chest. You turned them into fuel, into inner power, into force, into a reason. Every time they doubted you, something in you sharpened. Every time they laughed, something in you solidified. Every time they dismissed you, something in you rose. Quietly, steadily, relentlessly. They thought nothing was happening, but everything was happening. Growth is invisible until it isn't. Transformation is silent until it speaks. Power is slow until it arrives all at once. And now, you're impossible. The thing they swore could never happen is standing in front of them like a mirror they can't avoid, a mirror that reflects everything they got wrong, every limit they tried to place on you, every story they tried to write in your name. Your impossible became their proof, their reality check, their lesson. They spent years assuming the world was built the way they understood it. But you didn't follow the map. You erased it. You didn't wait for permission. You outgrew the system. You didn't ask to be accepted. You became undeniable. Now they're scrambling, searching for reasons, asking themselves how it happened, how you happened, how something they dismissed could become something they can't ignore. And here's the truth they struggle to face. You were never small. They were just blind. You were never weak. They just couldn't measure your kind of strength. You were never nothing. They just didn't have the range to see what was forming. Now they do. Now they feel it. Now they're living inside the shockwave of your becoming. The same voice that said you'd never be anything can barely speak now, because every breath you take is proof they were wrong, and every step you take is a reminder. You didn't become something in spite of their doubt. You became something because of it. They only paid attention to the noise. That was their mistake. They watched for fall apart, not construction. They looked for gossip, not growth. They waited for signs of failure, not seeds of evolution. They thought you disappeared because you were done, not because you were becoming. See, they never learned how transformation really works. They think the rise is loud. They think power announces itself. They think success is something they can see coming from miles away. But real change, real greatness, real destiny, it grows in silence, it evolves in shadow, it matures out of sight. You didn't scream your progress. You lived it. You didn't argue with their doubt. You outgrew it. You didn't try to convince them. You let time do the talking. And now that time is here, and they have nothing to defend themselves with. No excuses, no explanations, no stories that make sense anymore, because the version of you they doubted is gone. You replaced it with something they never imagined, a version of you that has power in its voice, steel in its presence, inner power in its eyes. They used to call you unreasonable. Now they call you unstoppable. They used to call you unrealistic. Now they call you the exception, because your impossible didn't just happen. It rewrote the rules they tried to use against you, the future they said you'd never reach. You live inside it now. The doors they said were locked. You built your own entrance. The potential they refused to see, it became too bright to deny. And don't misunderstand this. They remember exactly what they said. They remember the tone. They remember the smirk. They remember who they were when they believed you'd never rise. But now they can't say it out loud anymore. Because you exist. Because you made it. Because you became the proof they swore would never exist. That's the paradox they struggle to face. They tried to define you. You redefined reality instead. And now every time they see you, and they do, they remember the version of themselves that doubted you. They remember that they were small. They remember that they were wrong. They remember that they underestimated a force built for much more than their opinion. Your existence is their correction. Your evolution is their consequence. Your power is their awakening. You didn't just rise, you forced the world to rewrite everything it thought it knew about you. And now your very presence is the punchline to every doubt they ever spoke. There comes a moment, a quiet, irreversible moment, where the world finally sees you. Not the version they assumed, not the version they mocked, not the version they tried to shrink into something manageable. No, they see you. The real one. The one who was forming beneath every insult, every dismissal, every moment they swore you'd never be more than a footnote. That moment has arrived, and it's uncomfortable for them, because now you are standing in the center of a truth they never prepared for. You didn't need their belief to become legendary. They told you you were dreaming too big. They said you were trying too hard. They laughed when you imagined a life that didn't fit their logic. But funny thing, nobody's laughing now. The same voices that said you'll never make it are suddenly quiet. The same eyes that rolled at your ambition can't look away. The same people who swore you'd stay in place are now frozen, watching what they said was impossible unfold right in front of them. That's the thing about doubt. It's loud when it thinks it's winning, but when the truth exposes it, it goes silent. It hides. It becomes a ghost, terrified of being seen. They thought they were being realistic. They called it logic. They called it protecting you from disappointment. But the real disappointment was this. They never believed in what was already inside you. They couldn't see your inner power. They couldn't feel your hunger. They couldn't sense the force building behind your quiet grind. They thought they were commenting on your limits, but they were really confessing their own. Because people who believe in themselves don't fear your potential. People who dream don't mock dreamers. People who grow don't sit around doubting growth. It was never about you being too much. It was about them being afraid they were too little. They told you you'd never be anything. But what they meant was, I'm scared you'll become something I never had the courage to be. And now that you have, they're confronted with a truth far more brutal than being wrong. They gave up on themselves, and you didn't. That's why your success stings. Not because you proved them wrong, but because you proved what was always possible. You showed them what belief looks like in motion. You showed them what resilience becomes when it refuses to fall apart. You showed them what impossible turns into when it's challenged by someone who refuses to obey gravity. Now your existence is a lesson, a warning, a mirror. And every time they think of you, they remember the moment. Doubt lost its power. Here's the part they never saw coming. Your success didn't just make you undeniable, it made them visible. Because now everyone can see it. The way they doubted you, the way they rushed to underestimate you, the way they spoke like they knew the ending to a story that hadn't even begun. And now that the plot flipped, they're exposed. They thought they'd be standing over your ruins. Instead, they're standing in the shadow of your ascent. They thought time would prove them right, but time chose a side, and it wasn't theirs. That's the thing about doubt. It ages badly. It doesn't mature. It curdles. It sits in the air when truth shows up. And now here you are, not just alive, not just surviving, not just moving forward, but becoming the blueprint no one believed could exist. You didn't climb by being accepted. You climbed by refusing to disappear. You didn't rise because they believed in you. You rose because you believed in you. And what's hitting them hardest is this. You didn't need saving. You needed time. You didn't need applause. You needed focus. You didn't need permission. You needed isolation. Every "you'll never be anything" was actually an investment in your evolution. They were building you without realizing it. The doubt became discipline. The insults became ignition. The laughter became leverage. The rejection became refinement. You turned every no into a vow, every closed door into a blueprint, every moment they counted you out into a reason to become undeniable. And now, they're standing at the edge of something they can't stop. Your momentum, your power, your presence. It's bigger than their opinions. Bigger than their predictions, bigger than the limits they tried to place around you. They thought you were a moment. Turns out, you were an era. They thought they were doubting a person. Turns out, they were doubting a force. And now they're living inside the aftermath of that mistake, watching your impossible become reality. While their certainty becomes a punchline, there's a silence that hits the room when the truth finally arrives. Not the loud kind, not the dramatic kind, but the kind that makes everyone rethink everything. That's the silence surrounding your name right now, because it finally sunk in. You weren't slow. They were blind. You weren't lost. You were building. You weren't behind. You were becoming. They thought the struggle meant failure, but the struggle was the process. The pressure was the training. The doubt was the sharpening. You weren't supposed to be easy to understand. You were meant to be studied, decoded, unlearned and relearned. You were never meant to fit the category. You were meant to rewrite the definition. They said, "You'll never be anything." But tell me this. How can someone who refuses to quit end up with nothing? Not when every setback was fuel. Not when every delay was designed. Not when every silence was strategy. You weren't waiting for permission. You were waiting for alignment. And now that it's here, everything they thought was impossible is starting to look inevitable. They're not just shocked that you made it. They're shocked that you made it without them. No cosign, no shortcut, just scars. Lessons and quiet fire. You didn't need validation. You needed vision. You didn't need applause. You needed discipline. You didn't need support. You needed belief. And now the same people who said, "Stop dreaming. Grow up. Be realistic," are watching you shift reality itself. That's what makes it sting. Not just that they were wrong, but that they never even saw the horizon you were walking toward. They thought you were done, but you were just done listening to them. And now your name is echoing in places they never imagined you'd enter. Your presence is being discussed by people they once worshipped. Your work is being respected by minds they assumed were out of reach. All because you refused to let their small vision shrink your future. That's the punchline they never expected. You didn't just prove them wrong, you made impossible look small. You made never look foolish. You made nothing look like the beginning of everything. And now the world is watching what comes next, while they're stuck replaying the moment they underestimated you. They're still trying to figure out when it happened. When did the person they shrugged off turn into the person they now fear being compared to? Some say it was the day you went quiet. Others say it was the day you stopped explaining. But the truth, it was the day you stopped needing them at all. You see, they thought success was loud, flashy, announced in advance. But your rise, it was silent, internal, almost invisible, until it became undeniable. That's the kind of transformation that shakes people, because they can't track it, they can't measure it, and they definitely can't stop it. You grew in places they never looked. You built skills they never valued. You developed a mindset they never respected. And now, the same people who claimed you were nothing special are whispering your name like it's a warning. Because the truth they never wanted to face is standing right in front of them. You were never trying to fit in. You were studying the whole system. You weren't chasing attention. You were building alignment. You weren't trying to win their approval. You were preparing for a future only you could see. And now, the future is here. And suddenly everyone's acting shocked, acting confused, acting like it wasn't obvious. But here's the part they'll never admit. They did see it. They just didn't believe it. They saw the intensity, the quiet ambition, the relentless patience. They saw the way you paid attention to things they ignored, like self-control, emotional intelligence, long-term focus. They saw your eyes change when you talked about your purpose, but they told themselves it didn't matter. And now they're forced to watch what happens when someone refuses to fold, just because the world said they should. You didn't skip steps. You didn't cheat the process. You didn't get lucky. You stayed in the shadows until you could cast your own light. Now they're scrambling for explanations. Who helped them? Where did they come from? How did this happen? They still can't comprehend that the most powerful person in the room is the one who spent years being dismissed. They tried to bury you, but they never checked what kind of soil you were planted in. They tried to replace you, but they never understood what made you rare. They tried to define you, but they never learned your language. Now they're face to face with a reality they helped create. The one they dismissed is the one they can't outrun. Their doubt didn't stop you. It sharpened you. Their silence didn't erase you. It protected you. Their disbelief didn't weaken you. It freed you. And now every room you enter carries the same tension. This one is different. This one saw the truth before it arrived. This one turned never into destiny. They told you you'd never be anything. Congratulations. You just became the reminder that their imagination was too small. They don't say it out loud, but you can feel it now. The shift in how they look at you, the hesitation, the second guessing, the uneasy respect that wasn't there before. They used to speak to you like they were above you. Now they speak like they're trying not to reveal their insecurity. That's what happens when someone outgrows the box they were placed in. Not by shouting, not by begging, not by proving anything, but by becoming someone too undeniable to ignore. They told you you'd never amount to anything. Remember, they said it casually. They said it confidently. They said it like they were reading a fact from a file. But now those same voices are rewriting history. I always knew they had something. I could tell from the start. I supported them the whole time. Funny how the world rearranges its memory when faced with someone it misjudged. You didn't change for them? You changed in spite of them. And now they're learning a lesson the hard way. Doubt is a dangerous currency, not because it stops those who are doubted, but because it fuels them. They thought their words would break you. Instead, those words became bricks, and you built something with them, something solid, something lasting, something real. They still don't understand how you did it, because they were tracking fame while you were tracking mastery. They were watching followers while you were studying patterns. They were waiting for validation while you were breaking your own limits. You didn't become powerful because they underestimated you. You became powerful because you outgrew their permission. That's the part they'll never forgive. Not the success, not the growth, not the evolution, but the fact that you didn't need them to make it real. Let that sink in. You walked through a world that tried to forget you. Now it has to remember you forever. Your story is the thing they fear most, the quiet one, the patient one, the written off one, who rewrote everything. They wanted you ordinary. You became impossible. They wanted you forgettable. You became the example. They wanted you small. You became undeniable. Now the same people who once said, "You'll never be anyone," are adjusting their tone when they speak your name. They don't call it jealousy. They call it curiosity. They call it surprise. But you can hear the truth inside the silence. They never thought you'd survive. They definitely never thought you'd rise. And now, they're forced to face the one outcome they never prepared for. You didn't just become something. You became the thing they never saw coming. The reality check they can't avoid. The proof that never is just a word people use when they can't imagine the size of your becoming. And here's the poetic part. When they look at you now, they aren't just seeing who you are. They're seeing every moment they should have paid attention. Every moment they could have supported you. Every moment they missed their chance. And in the quiet spaces of their minds, they finally understand. You weren't failing. You were forming. And now the world has to live with the result. Say it softly. Say it with peace. Say it like a prophecy fulfilled. They told me I'd never be anything. Look at me now. There's a moment in every legend's life where the world quietly realizes it was wrong about them. It's not loud. It's not dramatic. No applause. No spotlight. Just a shift. Sudden. Undeniable. Irreversible. A moment where the whispers change. Where the questions turn into conclusions. Where the skepticism collapses under its own weight. You just crossed that moment. And now the ones who swore you'd never become anything are trying to figure out how you became everything without their approval, without their permission, without their blueprint. That's what they don't understand. You didn't climb their ladder. You built a door they never notice. You didn't beg for an invitation. You walked in like you already belonged. You didn't play their game. You rewrote the rules and stayed calm while they panicked. And now, they're studying you like a glitch, a pattern breaker, a living exception. They're scrolling through old memories, trying to find the moment they missed something, because that's what stings the most. Not your success, but the fact that they couldn't predict it. They couldn't stop it. They couldn't own it. Every person who doubted you is now stuck with one quiet realization. They underestimated someone who was never running their race. That's why you were never losing. You were building, quietly, steadily, patiently. And they can't handle patience. They wanted your collapse on a schedule. They wanted your failure on cue. But you gave them silence, and growth, and transformation they couldn't measure. You didn't turn into what they expected. You turned into what they feared. Someone who doesn't fold under pressure, but becomes pressure. Someone who doesn't need applause to know their worth. Someone who doesn't chase validation because they carry truth. And the truth is this: their doubt was never a prophecy. It was only proof of their limits, not yours. Every time they said you won't make it, they were really saying, we can't imagine it. But imagination is not required for destiny. Destiny doesn't need their faith. Destiny doesn't need their permission. Destiny doesn't wait for them to believe. It keeps moving. And it chose you. That's the part they can't file away or erase. You survived being overlooked. You survived being dismissed. You survived being counted out. And now you're forcing the world to recalculate everything. They're watching you rise and pretending it doesn't bother them. But it does. They feel it in their pride. They hear it in their minds. They taste it in the silence. Because now the world sees what they refused to see. Now the world hears what they tried to silence. Now the world is witnessing what they swore would never happen. And they don't have a script for this part. They don't have a plan for this outcome. They spent so long betting against you, they never learned how to face you. And now, they have to. Quietly, respectfully, reluctantly. Because the impossible they mocked is standing right in front of them. Breathing. Rising, unbothered. Say it again, not for them, for you. Everything they said I'd never be, I became. Hello, my dear warrior. So specially you arrived. You are here. Welcome, welcome, welcome. You walked in, and it happened. All eyes turned. Every breath caught. The whole room froze. Laughter died mid-echo. Hands stiffened mid-motion. Even clocks on the wall seemed to hesitate. They had dismissed you once, whispered outcast like it was your destiny. But in that moment, destiny snapped. The silence wasn't empty. It was recognition. Recognition that you had shifted. You weren't the background anymore. You weren't the shadow they ignored. You were the storm in the center. And they felt it in their bones. The one they mocked had just become the one they could not ignore. Every gaze carried history. Eyes that once looked past you, now locked onto you, wide with disbelief. Eyes that once mocked you now trembled, searching for safety in silence. Even the proudest among them felt their pupils widen, as if staring too long might break them. You didn't raise your voice, you didn't move a muscle. Their fear was born from your stillness. That's the moment they realized the outcast they ridiculed wasn't fragile, they were blind. Because kings aren't crowned by ceremony, they are crowned by presence, and your presence had just bent the room into submission. Silence can press heavy, but whispers always find a way out. One voice cracked in the corner. Do you feel it? Another hissed. Something's changed. And suddenly the room wasn't quiet anymore. It was buzzing with dread disguised as awe. Every word spread like sparks across dry wood. They had no proof, no evidence, but they didn't need it. The truth was already written in their trembling hands and frozen stares. The outcast had shifted. What was once ridicule had become rumor, and what was once rumor had become recognition. The whisper left the room, carried on restless lips, birthing a legend that no one could contain. They searched for a throne to explain it, a crown to justify it, a title to contain it, but none existed. You hadn't been crowned. You hadn't been chosen. You had become. The weight they felt wasn't ceremony. It was inevitability. Their hierarchy cracked. Their rituals meant nothing, because the crown wasn't in their hands. It was in the air, pressed against their shoulders, forcing them to bow without command. And that's when they understood. Kings aren't made by coronations. Kings are revealed when reality itself bends to a presence it cannot deny. And tonight, reality bent to you. Once, your name was their favorite force. They spoke it in mockery, spat it out in laughter, carved it into jokes to remind you of your place. But in that frozen room, none dared say it aloud. Every tongue felt heavy, every throat sealed shut. Because names have power, and suddenly yours carried too much. They feared even whispering it would mark them, bind them, expose their weakness. The silence wasn't respect, it was fear of recognition. And in that fear, they gave you something stronger than titles or applause. They gave you silence that belonged only to kings. The room remained still, but the silence grew heavier. Not a word, not a step, not a breath dared break the atmosphere you carried. Their hearts pounded like drums, yet none dared let the sound escape. In that frozen stillness, they realized the shift was irreversible. The outcast they once dismissed had become the gravity holding them in place. Their bodies bowed without command, their voices sealed without request. And in that moment, the crown appeared. Not of gold, not of jewels, but of undeniable presence. Kings rise by force, emperors by conquest. But you rose in silence, and silence proved stronger than both. The silence stretched until it cracked. One man tried to laugh, but the sound came out hollow. Another shifted in his chair, only to sit back down, knees trembling. Without command, without crown, the room bowed, not in formality, but in instinct. Shoulders slumped, eyes lowered, spines curved as if gravity itself had changed direction. They realized the truth too late. This was not performance. This was not illusion. This was authority that needed no symbol. The outcast they had mocked was no longer beneath them. The outcast had risen above, and their own bodies confessed it before their minds dared to. It spread like a crack in glass. The very air pressed down, heavy with recognition, and suddenly every person in the room understood something irreversible had occurred. They remembered the nights they had mocked you, the whispers they carried behind your back. the laughter that rang when your presence was dismissed. Yet here they were, silent, frozen, unable to move as the gravity of your rise pressed the walls around them. They wanted to explain it, call it coincidence, call it nerves, but explanations died on their tongues. Because what they witnessed wasn't coincidence, it was coronation. Not with gold, not with trumpets, but with silence sharper than steel. And in that silence, the rumor ignited. The outcast had turned king. The words moved faster than sound itself, spreading like a storm no one could contain. It started small, two trembling voices in the back, repeating what they saw. Did you feel that? The outcast shifted. But whispers are sparks, and sparks feed flames. By the time you left the room, the silence had already fractured into noise, hushed voices, carried through corridors, echoing across streets. Some called you dangerous. Others swore they had just witnessed destiny. And the more they spoke, the less control they had over their own dread. Rooms that hadn't seen you still froze at the mention of your name. Entire gatherings fell quiet when the story was told. They didn't need proof. They needed only the memory of trembling voices. And soon, it wasn't just rumor. It was law whispered in awe. The one they cast aside had risen, and the crown had chosen without ceremony. The walls could not hold it. What happened in silence was carried out in fire. Every witness became a messenger, though none admitted it aloud. One claimed the air froze when you entered. Another swore the clock stopped. Their words contradicted each other, but the contradictions only fueled the legend. The story spread beyond the hallways, into streets, into corners where your name had never mattered before. And suddenly it mattered everywhere. You didn't need to declare yourself. You didn't need to ask. The world was already whispering. The outcast just turned king. And once a whisper begins, it never returns to silence. It multiplies. Until even those who weren't there believe they saw it with their own eyes. By morning, the story wasn't just rumor. It was myth. Those who hated you swore they never doubted. Those who mocked you pretended they had always known. Yet the dread in their eyes betrayed them. Every retelling made the silence sharper. Every whisper made the crown heavier. You hadn't asked for respect. You hadn't begged for recognition. It was stolen by your presence, forced into their trembling voices. Carried like wildfire, the outcast they laughed at became the legend they spread with shaking tongues. And in the space between awe and reverence, one truth ignited. Kings are not chosen. Kings reveal themselves. And last night, the room saw one rise. When you left, the room exhaled as if released from chains. But relief never came. Because every step you took outside only tightened the grip of the story. They whispered. What happens when they return? Meetings stalled at the mention of your name, as if reality itself braced for your shadow. Some swore they still felt your presence in the chairs you touched, in the walls that echoed your silence. The crown you never asked for followed you like a storm cloud, pressing down on every space you entered. You didn't need to speak, didn't need to remind them. Their trembling reminded themselves. The outcast they once dismissed had rewritten their instincts. Every glance over a shoulder, every pause in conversation was proof. The next time you walked in, the room would not just freeze, it would bow. Fear is faster than truth. Long before anyone understood what had shifted, your name had already grown teeth. In offices, in alleyways, in homes lit only by whispers, they spoke of you. Some said your presence froze air itself. Others swore clocks bent when you entered. No two stories matched, yet all carried the same pulse, dread dressed as prophecy. They wanted to laugh it off, but the laughter died in their throats because silence had crowned you. Every retelling added weight until your name no longer belonged to you. It belonged to their trembling. You had become more than an outcast, more than a king. You had become the myth that every whisper carried, the unseen presence every shadow saluted. Once they dragged your name across floors, laughed while you sat at the edge of rooms, treated you like furniture no one noticed. But the freeze changed everything. The same tables where they mocked you now carried silence whenever you approached. The same chairs where they left you forgotten now felt like thrones no one dared to sit in. Those who once looked down on you couldn't meet your eyes. Their smirks collapsed into stutters, their jokes dissolved before reaching air. They realized too late that cruelty had crowned you faster than kindness ever could. Every insult became a stone in your foundation, every sneer a rung on your ascent. The outcast they tried to erase had turned the weight of their mockery into a crown heavier than gold, and now they bowed beneath it. They once spoke with confidence when your back was turned. Jokes, lies, whispers meant to cut you down. But now, every word about you carried a tremor. In public, they stayed silent, afraid the air itself might betray them. In private, their voices cracked, as though saying your name summoned the freeze. And the irony burned. Your silence spoke louder than their voices ever could. You never raised a hand, never demanded allegiance, yet their tongues bent anyway. Outcast was no longer their force. King was no longer your ambition. The transformation was forced into their speech, etched in every stammer. They didn't choose to respect you. They were compelled. And as their voices faltered, your presence wrote the script. Every word they spoke was proof of your reign. At first it was a room, then a hallway, then entire crowds froze when you appeared. People who once overlooked you, now parted like rivers, leaving space as though presence itself demanded a path. They didn't cheer, they didn't clap. Those are noises of choice. What followed you was instinct. Whispers moved faster than footsteps, carrying your rise into ears that had never seen you. Soon strangers stared with the same unease your enemies once held, as if they too had been in that frozen room. That is how power spreads, not through speeches or crowns, but through silence that multiplies. You never asked for followers, but entire streets shifted their pace around you. The outcast had not only turned king, the king had become legend, and legends don't walk unnoticed. They bend the world with every step. Those who mocked you first now carried the heaviest chains. They remembered every smirk, every whispered insult, every time they laughed while you sat alone. At the time, it gave them power. Now, it drained them. In crowded halls, they avoided your gaze, terrified that silence would turn its weight upon them alone. They wanted to apologize, but the words never left their throats, because apologies are for equals, and they no longer believed themselves worthy. Regret clung to them like frost, sharper than judgment. They weren't afraid of what you might do. They were afraid of what your very existence had already revealed, that their cruelty was nothing more than fuel for your rise. And as they watched the outcast turn king, their regret was carved into eternity. By now, the legend was heavier than the air itself. Rooms didn't just freeze when you entered. They collapsed into silence. Conversations broke mid-word. Smiles snapped into stillness. Even the confident ones, The ones who used to command attention found their lungs betraying them. They inhaled too sharply, exhaled too slow, terrified that even their breath might offend your gravity. The stillness wasn't fear of what you would do. It was fear of what you already were. Every second stretched like eternity. Every heartbeat sounded like thunder in their ears. And the silence crowned you again, louder than applause, heavier than power. The outcast had not just entered the room. The king had bent the room into submission. Everywhere you went, eyes followed. Not in mockery anymore, not in pity, but in awe sharpened with dread. Strangers froze in doorways. Conversations snapped mid-word. And entire rooms shifted to silence the moment you appeared. Their stares weren't simple glances, they were confessions. Each pair of eyes admitted what mouths could not. The hierarchy had changed. The one they ignored was now the axis. And the longer they looked, the more they trembled, as though staring too long might burn them. They wanted to look away, but couldn't, because deep down they knew. This was no accident. This was coronation by presence. The outcast they once dismissed had forced reality to acknowledge the crown, and now every stare bent like glass under its weight. Whispers left rooms, leaked into corridors, spilled onto streets. Soon your name wasn't just spoken, it was carried like fire, passed from mouth to mouth, faster than truth could run. They didn't agree on details. Some said the room froze, others swore the walls shook. But every version ended the same. The outcast just turned king. That phrase spread quicker than news, sharper than rumor. It crawled into homes, schools, markets, and prisons alike. People who had never seen you felt the shift as if they had been there. That's how legends are born, not by proof but by repetition. Every whisper added weight. Every telling crowned you higher. And before the week was over, your rise wasn't just a story. It was law etched into awe, carved into respect, carried by voices that couldn't stop repeating it. At first there were skeptics. They smirked in back rooms saying, "It's just rumor, nothing more." But when they entered the same spaces you had touched, their confidence shattered. One doubter laughed too loud, only to feel the air collapse in his lungs. Another tried to mock you, but his reflection refused to follow his movements. Even the boldest skeptics found themselves trembling, unable to explain why silence felt heavier where your name had been spoken. They stopped denying it, not because they believed the story, but because the story believed itself. The whispers carried weight, and that weight crushed every ounce of doubt. The doubters didn't admit you were king. Their unease admitted it for them, and once belief bends, the body follows. For centuries, war had been the ultimate measure of fear. Men trembled at the sound of legions marching, cities cracked under the weight of conflict. But when your name rose from whispers to law, war lost its crown. Soldiers swore they'd rather face fire than the silence that followed you. Generals confessed that one glance from you carried more weight than 1,000 battles. Nations realized that legions couldn't fight whispers, and missiles couldn't strike silence. You hadn't raised a force, yet kingdoms felt conquered. You hadn't drawn essence, yet empires felt invaded. The outcast they dismissed had grown into a force greater than war itself. And war, for the first time in history, bowed its head to something stronger. Presence. A single night turned into an era. Historians tried to deny it. Politicians tried to bury it. But the truth had already rooted itself. Too deep. They stopped calling it coincidence. Stopped calling it rumor. They began to mark calendars from that moment. The freeze, the silence, the coronation without ceremony. It wasn't just a shift in a room, it was the birth of a new order. Every throne felt lighter, every crown felt cheaper, because presence had rewritten the meaning of power. No king could rule without legions, no empire could rise without gold. But you had taken everything with silence. And from that silence, a new timeline began. The outcast was not remembered as broken. The outcast was remembered as the axis. From that night forward, every plan bent around your shadow. Councils debated policy, but each debate ended with your name. Generals drafted strategies, but each map dissolved into silence when your presence was recalled. Even prophets, who once painted futures, in fire and glory abandoned their visions, replacing them with fragments of your rise. The world itself had been restructured, not by decree, not by conquest, but by inevitability. They realized too late that you were not simply in the moment, you were the moment. Every road led back to the freeze, every story circled your silence. The future no longer belonged to them, to their crowns, or to their hierarchies. It bent toward you, written in whispers that stretched ahead like unbreakable law. Outcast was past. King was present. Legend was permanent. Time will try to wash it away. Records will be rewritten. Rulers will rise and fall. New empires will claim dominion. But the night the room froze cannot be erased. It lives in bone-deep memory, in the silence that still presses heavy on anyone who speaks your name too loudly. Outcast was the word they used to break you. King became the title they could not deny. But legend is what they accidentally built around you, brick by trembling brick, whisper by trembling whisper. And legends don't fade, they echo. Long after their crowns turn to dust, long after their thrones rot into ruins, the silence of that room will remain. And when history bends to find its axis, it will point to you, the one who turned exile into empire, mockery into monarchy, silence into law,